子供なのね夢を追って傷つい
Hello everybody, this is a July 2021 Infernoid deck profile. This is going to be a lot better than the budget Infernoid profile that I did quite a while ago, because back then I was trying to make do with not having playsets of the cards that you probably should have playsets of, but now I have the deck that I actually want, and also I'm a little more experienced with the deck in general. This deck is surprisingly strong for being fairly old. The fact that you can banish not only your hand and also your graveyard to summon monsters from both your hand and also your graveyard means that the deck, it can come back from having few cards in the hand and on the field and still make an impactful play that turn. This deck takes very good advantage of cards like Reasoning and Monster Gate and Layer of Darkness and Super Polymerization. Those four cards alone can be a big difference between winning and losing. That said, there are a fair amount of ways to counter Infernoid, namely Necro Valley for one, but also Macrocosmos, Dimensional Fissure, Imperial Iron Wall, and Dark Law. But because Infernoid runs a lot of spells too, Imperial Order, Anti-Spell Fragrance, those two cards also do hurt Infernoid quite a bit. But in many matchups, Infernoid, it does stand a chance. This deck is definitely one to be reckoned with. 3 Decatron. So this is the only monster in the deck that can be normal summoned, which means that sometimes you can actually mill the better part of your deck off Reasoning or Monster Gate until you see Decatron. Decatron lets you access the powerful quick effects of the mid-level Infernoids as well as the big ones, the Onunku and Deviati, directly from the deck. But one caveat is that Decatron will still have low attack. So sometimes you won't be able to use the quick effect that it gains before it's run over by battle, but definitely a must play at 3 in this deck, Decatron. 1 Antra, so all of these Infernoids besides the biggest and the smallest ones do have a DD Crow-like quick effect at the cost of tributing a monster. Antra also has a useful bouncing removal effect, but this is just the go-to level 2 if you need a level 2 for your Void Feast play. 2 Harmodiques, 2 Petrulia. These are the go-to monster and back row pop effects. Also, one of each of these alongside Decatron is a decent play if you're trying to use Feast. Antra, Petrulia, Harmodique, they all have useful removal effects, but also they have low levels, so you can have one or multiple on the field and you can keep summoning Infernoid monsters. 1 Piatti, 1 Sagette. So these two, they're really only in here so you can add up to level 8 with Void Feast. They either discard from the opponent's hand or they banish from the opponent's extra deck. Really not as useful as the lower and higher Infernoids, but I just needed, for one thing, Void Feast is the levels, so they add up. That's a big reason, but also I needed a few more monsters in here because Reasoning and Monster Gate can often mean that most of your deck is in the graveyard. I just thought it would be a good idea to have slightly more monsters to be milled so you can banish more and summon more. 3 Saitsemas, so this is where my build is kind of unique because I run 3 Saitsemas and no Atandel. Generally, Saitsemas' effect is better than Atandel's. Most of the time you'd rather banish a card on the field rather than attack again because Saitsemas can be monster removal as well as back row removal. Atandel is mostly just a beat stick. Saitsemas also being a level 7 means that you can summon a Decatron alongside it when you're using Feast, but you know, feel free to play a Tondel if you like it or if you feel that you need more monsters in the build. 2 Deviati, 2 Onunku. So these are the strongest Infernoids, but they also have the heftiest summoning condition. They have quick effects to negate spells and traps or monster effects, and upon summon they also blow up either spells and traps or monsters. The thing about these Infernoid monsters, and actually not just these two, but most of them, is that they have useful quick effects and strong quick effects that can actually stop the important plays of your opponent. They can also be special summoned from the graveyard, and most of them can. So like I said, it is very possible that even later in the game when you don't control many cards, you don't have many cards in your hand, there's still something you can do to come back. And these two cards definitely, with their board wipes, they can turn the duel around. Also, it is worth mentioning that all of these Infernoids, they have a summoning condition in the graveyard, not an effect. So cards like Abyss Dweller and Blue Eyes Spirit Dragon, they don't actually stop the summon of these bigger Infernoids. Spells, so the spell lineup is really where this deck shines and where most of its strength comes from. Void Imagination punishes your opponent for using the extra deck. All they need to have on the field is one extra deck monster, and you can not only summon Tierra pretty much for free, but you can also send up to 6 monsters from deck to grave to be special summoned later from the graveyard or used as banish fodder. Imagination, it also turns your monsters into level 1, so you can potentially have a board full of Infernoid monsters for multiple interruptions or multiple attacks, but the thing is that your battle damage will be halved, which is honestly balanced because it would be very easy to OTK if that wasn't the case, but still awesome card, Void Imagination. 3 Banishment, so this is pretty much just the search card for Imagination and Feast, giving you 3 extra copies of each. As is the case with many decks with Graveyard Synergy, discarding as cost, sometimes not even a bad thing. This card also does let you swing with a low attack Infernoid like Decatron and then banish both monsters in that battle. It also should be stated that this card is continuous, so you could search a Void, Spell, or Trap once every turn. Also, you can send this card or Imagination to the graveyard from the field after you use them already when you're trying to use Feast. 3 Lair of Darkness. So this card, it fits in very, very well in this deck for multiple reasons. With this card in the field, you can tribute your opponent's monsters with your Infernoids to use their effects. So not only are you doing something like banishing an opponent's card or negating their spell or monster effect, but you're also getting rid of their monster at the same time. Not only that, but Lair of Darkness makes Super Polymerization able to be used much more frequently because the whole deck is dark. And of course, Super Polymerization in general, just a very strong card. Finally, you can tribute your opponent's monsters to use Monster Gate as well. So just many reasons this card makes the deck a lot better. 3 Super Poly. So incredibly strong card in this deck for the reason that I mentioned. And the fact that it can't be responded to. This card, it just outs many boards. It gets you out of many situations. Can win you the game. 3 times Monster Gate. Mill your entire deck except for Decatron. Build up your graveyard. It is worse than Reasoning because you do have to tribute a monster unless you do have Lair of Darkness, in which case it's a good thing. But better than Reasoning because with Reasoning your opponent may call 1 and send Decatron to the graveyard. With Monster Gate that is not a factor. 2 Pot of Extravagance. So I decided to play only 2 of this card because you don't necessarily want to banish your entire extra deck. If you can keep a Tierra or a Nightmare Phoenix or a Super Polymerization target among those last 3 cards after you use 2 Extravagance, it can make the difference in the duel to have that card or those cards in your extra deck. Up to you again though, if you want to play 3, play 3. 1 Reasoning, so again, mill your whole deck. And if you're playing against Infernoids and your opponent uses Reasoning, you should call 1. And Terraforming, so Lair of Darkness, it does turn this pretty good deck into a very good deck, so you definitely want to see Lair as much as you can. And 4 Traps, so 2 Void Feast. I decided to play 2 Feast because it is possible to run out of targets in the deck that add up to 8 or just targets at all. But the good thing about Feast is that it does ignore the summoning conditions of the Infernoid, so you can control up above a total level of 8 and still summon up to 3 monsters from the deck. 1 Metaverse, so this is just one more card that accesses the field spell. And then finally a Breakthrough Skill. So this may seem like an outdated card, but this deck, it maxes out on Reasoning and Monster Gate, so it actually can come into handy on your turn to have this card in the graveyard. It also can just be set like a normal trap, of course. So 3 times Tierra. You generally don't need 3 of these in one duel, but running Extravagance does mean that it's better to max out. The most useful play is to send Entis to the graveyard from the extra deck to get those free destruction effects. Sometimes though, you will use monsters in your hand or field as materials and not just materials from your deck, so you will be able to pull off the 8+ or 10+ effects. The last one being especially good if you do have a handful of Infernoids that will go to the graveyard or just not a big hand and your opponent has a full hand to be discarded. So this is just the boss monster of the deck here. 3 times Entis. So sending this card to the graveyard off Tierra, like I said, free destruction, free pop. Sometimes you can send all 3 copies to the graveyard to pop 3 cards, but I do run the Omega just in case you don't need to pop 3 cards. Super Poly targets. So alongside Lair and Super Poly, these cards make the deck far stronger. The thing is that you don't always have Lair on the field, so Mud Dragon of the Swamp, like I've said before, is the winner and the most reliable of these 3. In one duel online, my opponent had Zeus on the field as well as Huaquero of the Golden Land, which is actually a light trap monster, and it seemed that I was about to lose, but I drew Super Poly. I did happen to have one more card in my hand to discard, and then I used his monsters to summon Mud Dragon and then swing for game. Just the fact that Super Poly can't be responded to makes this whole package a seriously good addition to this deck. 1 Omega, so this is a good alternative to send off Tierra to the graveyard if you don't need to pop cards with Entis, and then you can use this card to mess with your opponent's graveyard. 2 Nightmare Phoenix. So as I said in the beginning, certain floodgate spells and traps can hinder this deck a lot, so running this card, just a very useful generic monster here. And finally, a Gravity Controller. So this card, it does work in this deck because you deliberately put Tierra in the extra zone instead of the main zone, so you can use it as material for Gravity Controller here, and then you can clear your field of all the levels that you have, and then you can summon other Infernoids from your hand or from your graveyard. And that's pretty much the Infernoid deck profile for July 2021. Thank you for watching. See you.
なのにどうして